I'm Ari Melber with The Nation magazine, joined by David Plouffe, author of The Audacity to Win. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Ari.
One of the things you talk about repeatedly in the book is this permission structure. For example, in Iowa, you say Republicans and independents could attend the caucus, but they had to re-register as Democrats to do so. A huge barrier to participation was how you wrote it. And so you said, quote, "We had to find a way to create a permission structure to make this easier." Can you explain that concept for us as it worked in the campaign, and then perhaps how it's working now as the president seeks Republican and independent support for health care, although he doesn't always appear to be getting it?
Well, I think there's a big difference between getting folks on the Hill to vote for something as opposed to voters. But in the election, what we did was we were big believers in there was nothing more powerful than a neighbor talking to a neighbor, a family member talking to a family member. So we had a strategy and indeed a necessity, for instance in Iowa, to get young people, Republicans, independents to caucus. You know, we thought the most likely reason that they would, of course they had to have some interest in and belief in Barack Obama. But what would push them over the line was their friend down the street who's a Republican saying, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to the caucus. Why don't you come with me? I'm going to go volunteer in the campaign office if you're a young person. All the way through the general election. You know, we thought that was a very important dynamic. And I still think that's happening on healthcare, despite all the attacks, despite the history of failure. You've got a lot of Americans out there talking about this. And it's one of the reasons that, you know, even though it's a divided issue, on things like death panels, loss of doctor choice, some of the real favorite attack lines from the right wing back in August and September, those have generally faded away, and generally because people are talking to each other. We live in a society now, particularly because of technology. People are having dozens of conversations every day with colleagues, family members, friends. I think we tapped into that reality pretty well in the campaign, and we're trying to now.
But for the structure then, what you're saying, it's sort of social, like these people could be for Obama but not necessarily be changing their party, and they could explain that to their friends, or how does the friendship work in your mind?
It's always easier to do something, you know, when you've got an ally, so to speak. So if you're a Republican sitting in Marshalltown, Iowa, and you say, you know what, I've checked out Obama, I think I'm going to go caucus for him. You're more likely to go if you talk to your brother, or your colleague, your friend, and they say, you know what, I'll go too. We'll both go change our registration. So plenty of people didn't have that. But I do think that, you know, why did so many young people participate, contribute? Of course, again, they had to have real interest in Barack Obama. But it was usually because somebody else in their circle was doing it too. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, that's the way human beings tend to work. And so, you know, we did a lot of that. You know, to win Indiana, we needed to get 13% of the Republican vote, had to get over 10% in Florida. So a lot of that was, you know, Republicans talking to each other saying, you know what, even if they'd say, I'm surprised I'm going to do this, but I'm going to vote for Barack Obama because I just can't take any more of these economic policies that McCain is, you know, pledging to continue.
Well, and you mentioned the youth. You also write, from the beginning, the two categories of people who made up the largest percentage of our donor pool were retirees and students. Yeah. If you look today, if you saw, there was a Harvard study just last week on voters under 30, and they overwhelmingly continue to support this president. But also, they disapprove of his handling of just about every major issue, according to the Harvard researchers. Can you speak to that, and do you think that this resilient coalition that in some ways people argue is perhaps not even policy-based actually gives this president more room to maneuver, or how do you see that data?
Well, listen, I think the president's unique in this regard. And we're sitting here a few blocks from the Capitol, definitely unique in this town. You know, so much of every day, every moment, every decision is covered through the prism of politics. Okay, he's just trying to do the right thing here. And we're in tough times. So whether you're 28 or you're 68, you're touched by this economy. So people are obviously anxious. But I have a lot of confidence that first of all, the younger voters tend to have a worldview that matches his. They wanted to repair and strengthen our relationships with the rest of the world. They got the sense that politicians weren't tackling the tough problems that they were going to inherit and would impede their future: energy, healthcare, education. So I think if you look on balance, where we're going to be down the road here is, you know, did some very tough things to help stabilize the economy and ultimately make it grow. Economy will start growing again, hopefully including the requisite job growth. We will have done something we tried to do for 100 years and finally begin to solve the health insurance crisis, which is both a moral issue and an economic issue. We are making big strides on energy, need to do more. Okay? It's clear that if we don't lead on energy and allow other countries to take a huge advantage over us, this country's not going to be as strong in 40 or 50 years as we'd like. But so my point is, you do all these things, and I think as the economy heals and as people see, you know, understand what he's trying to do here, which is to do something to get Washington to look past the next news cycle, the next week, the next election. Do the hard things that will foundationally strengthen this country at a time it sorely needs to be.
But you think this, I mean, this cohort, you think he can hold young folks even if they continue to
I
disapprove?
do. But again, I think all of these political questions are secondary to doing the right things for the country. I mean, I couldn't believe that more strongly today than I did in the campaign. And it's why I think he's a unique leader, because that's what he's focused on. So I think, yes, I think over time, I certainly don't think the National Republican Party is providing young voters, Latino voters, African American voters, groups they have catastrophic problems with right now, giving them any reason to embrace them. So if we lead as a party, if he leads as a president, and he is, I think we'll have electoral success. Now, does that mean we're going to win every election? No. But I think the foundation here is very strong. I think the Republicans, I really do believe that Boehner, McConnell, these guys, they're going to be looked on historically as, guilty of political malpractice, because at a time of grave economic problems, when we're dealing with these huge challenges of healthcare and energy, these guys are nowhere to be found. Reprehensible, really.
And on technology, you mentioned earlier, and throughout the book, there's sort of this theme of Barack Obama, and by extension the campaign, reaching people directly and often routing around traditional filters, media filters and other sort of filters in the political establishment. You write, for example, I saw how important the burgeoning online world was to our overall success. New media would touch just about every aspect of our campaign, so I had the department report directly to me. That's you, David, unusual in presidential campaigns, and something that's, of course, been discussed a lot. Why do you think now the White House does not have new media reporting up directly, but it's more been swallowed into the communications office?
Well, there are distinct, in a campaign, so what new media, and I actually write in the book, I don't think it should be called new media anymore. I prefer it to be called digital strategy, because it's not new and it's not just media. But it would touch, obviously, all of our organizing, our fundraising, our message delivery, the internal communication of the campaign. In the White House, obviously, you're not raising money, and you're really not doing organizing. So the main focus really is to help deliver message. But I think the new media department in the White House, you look at the website, you look at the creative ways they're trying to reach people, nothing's been done like this before. And I think what we realized was that, listen, as you know, we spent a lot of time with the mainstream media. He does as president, we will in the next campaign. You have to do that. So it was not a substitution for, but you have to recognize that a lot of people do not consume political news with any regularity. So the only way to reach them is through your own activities, things like television advertising, internet advertising, but also to try and directly reach them, either through an email or a text, or have someone they know say, hey, look at this Obama video, check this out. I mean, and by the way, that's going to only increase. It's only going to increase in the years to come. And it's not just, you look at a lot of this electorate the Surge Obama electorate was well-educated, decent incomes, younger
Surge
people.
Obama?
Yeah, the people who turned out in '08. Who hadn't turned out in '04 and 2000. I mean, it was over 15 million people, first-time voters, huge percentage of the electorate. He won them 71-27. It's why we won the election. And so they're hard to reach. They're not watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC. They're not reading any national newspapers. They may be looking at The Nation from time to time. They may go online occasionally to read their local newspaper. But, the ability to reach people directly is not just a luxury anymore. I think it's a necessity. And so you're still reaching a lot of the electorate through news conferences, through interviews, and that's important, obviously. But you're leaving out a whole segment of the electorate and the American population if you don't try and create kind of a mechanism to reach them either directly to themselves or through their circle of friends.
And then when you reach them, you can build these relationships, and then as we saw, you raised just historic sums of money. You also write that it's one of the sources of the greatest tension during the campaign. You explained, an internal struggle between fundraising and internet were some of the tensest disputes I had to navigate throughout the whole campaign. You describe a lingering sore spot that you said lasted for over a year. The finance team, quote, really believed the new media team was underperforming financially, which most people wouldn't see today, but in the heat of it at the time. And then you say, and quote, the new media team thought the finance team viewed them and our supporters as an ATM. And that's very interesting now, because just last week there was some pretty strong criticism from Obama allies on this ATM front. I wanted to give you a chance to respond to it. You have Marcos Melitsas, very prominent blogger at Daily Kos, who got the Barack Obama fundraising ask around healthcare last week. And so I'll read this to you. He says, quote, okay, all we have to do is send the DNC $5 and we get ponies. The same DNC that's enabling corporatist Democrats to water down and destroy hope for what he calls true health care reform. He says this is so obnoxious he can hardly stand it. We're about to get a reform package that might be worse than the status quo. We have the insurance industry declaring victory, Republicans cackling with glee, and the administration is using that to raise money. And what he says that I think goes beyond that. People often can have good faith disagreements about the healthcare policy, but something to the relationships on the lists in the campaign. He says this is insulting, quote, betraying a lack of understanding of just how pissed off the base is at this so-called reform. So he, speaking as someone who did back Obama and often writes positively, would argue that that fundraising email and that kind of outreach at the very time that progressives are upset about some of the healthcare compromises, as he says, is insulting or out of touch to the list. It reminded me of some of what you discuss in the book. How do you view that, or do you have a response to that?
Well, couldn't disagree more strongly on the analysis of healthcare. The principles the president laid out in the campaign, he's been talking about for a year, I have a great deal of confidence in going to be president in any package, which is we're going to reduce costs for the government, for families, for businesses, so we can create jobs and grow. We're going to provide the ability for everyone in this country to get coverage, and we're going to end insurance company abuses. So, I have very little tolerance for this, because we're trying to solve something that is a systemic problem that's afflicted us for decades. It's very hard. You've got the insurance company, an entire opposition party arrayed against you. It's a really hard thing to do. And I think when we get this passed, it's going to be one of the most important things to happen to assure success in this country. Listen, I've been out on a book tour. I've seen a lot of people. The base I view is the people who gave money and volunteered in the campaign. Okay? Now, there's been plenty of people who are commentators who did that too, and I thank them for that. But the heartbeat of the campaign and the Obama organization are the people out there that I've seen in the last few weeks in St. Louis, in Kansas City, in Philly, in New Hampshire, in Iowa, who are out there knocking on doors, sending emails, holding press conferences on health care. So their belief in this president, their belief in health care. Listen, one of the reasons they got involved in our campaign is they believed that it was going to take somebody like him from the outside to change things, because it's so hard. They get how hard it is. It's easy to take pot shots, okay, but I'm very closely kind of in contact with the people who made up the heartbeat on the ground level of Obama for America and who are still out there. We've had a couple million people out there volunteering for health care, quietly, in communities, helping maintain support. Now, it's different than a campaign. You're not out there saying register 8 voters today, recruit 3 volunteers. I mean, it's different.
Right, the metrics are
It's
different.
and I wish that the people who serve in that building down the road from here with the dome on it were highly sensitized to their constituents. Not all of them are. And so, the truth is, you could have 15,000 people, go to Republican members' offices. They're not going to vote the right way on health care. But what we can do is educate the American people, answer their questions. I think one of the strengths of our grassroots organization has been, unlike most people in both parties, they treat their email list first as a fundraising opportunity. We've always had a more balanced approach. They are our message deliverers out there. They do help us financially. They organize. They do all the important organizational work they did in the campaign, they are now. And so I think that you still see today, a lot of political organizations, they aren't asking their people to do much other than give money. And I think if you look at the 3-year history of our effort here, it's a very balanced approach, and it's one of the reasons there's such a strong relationship, because people understand we have to ask them for money sometimes. But they realize that what we're interested in a lot more than that, and we value a lot more than that.
And so you're talking partly about Organizing for America, which is OFA folded into the DNC and has been very focused on healthcare. Your firm consults for the DNC partly on that work, and you still sign some of those emails. But you obviously also definitely declined opportunities to perhaps enter the administration or take a more formal role running the DNC. So walk us through what your role is with OFA, and who is the White House point of contact for those organizing efforts?
Well, OFA is run by Mitch Stewart, who was our Iowa caucus director, ran Virginia for us. Jen O'Malley, who was our Battleground States Director, is the DNC executive director, so she spends a lot of time with us. Jeremy Bird's our deputy over there. He was our field director in South Carolina in the primary and worked in both Pennsylvania and Ohio for us later in the campaign. So they run the thing day to day. I'm just kind of an advisor, I'm starting to get gray hair, but kind of someone who's just there to advise both on the creation of it and the operation of it as we go down the line.
Does it
But-
come up with your dealings with the president or anyone else at the White House? Does that come up or not as much now?
Well, obviously, there's some communication about, obviously he's, for instance, taped some videos that go exclusively to our list that post on the website. So obviously there's communication around that. But the White House is obviously focused on, trying to get 60 votes in the Senate, 218 in the House. So there's communication obviously around messaging, but it's pretty clear. I mean, one of the nice things is the president's out there every day, for the most part, making a case on health care. We want to distill that and get it out. See, one of the things OFA does that I don't think they didn't appreciate this in the campaign, and it's not fully appreciated now. Simply be able to reach, over 10 million people directly with a fulsome message that's more than watch any nightly newscast, pretty important, okay? And we're able to do that so that they are better informed about what he's trying to do, answer some of the criticisms. So if they're talking to their neighbor and their neighbor says, well, what about this death panel thing? Our supporter says, well, it's complete nonsense, and let me tell you why. And would you like me to share some information? That's how this happens. That's how this happens, the building of support. And so, of course, is it the same intensity as the campaign? Of course not. It was pretty clear after the election, our people all wanted to stay in contact, which is great.
Right.
And in fact, we've had a lot of people come onto the list new who weren't involved in the campaign, who just want to get the information. But, people were not going to volunteer at the same intensity level. But I, quite frankly, am thrilled and that over 2 million people, which is a lot, have done something on healthcare, meaning they've gone out and knocked doors. They visited a congressional office. They have helped organize a press conference. And, it's happened in all 50 states, and we think it's a small part of why healthcare reform will get done.
Well, in the book, you describe it as sort of your own television network that was functioning, and you've just said you can reach these people and it's significant. Do you have a sense, though, you mentioned lower intensity broadly, do you have a sense of whether the email open rates are lower, what they are at? I mean, one metric that's very vague, but it's something that we only have to go on, and the public record is, the YouTube counts on a lot of those promoted videos are lower. It's not the campaign season anymore, so that's actually quite understandable, looking cyclically. But are there any other metrics you look at or that you can share that give you a sense of whether that's half of 10 million people opening that email or less or more?
Well, we've always had in the campaign and now, very high open rates compared to other organizations, and that continues.
That does
as I said,
continue, you feel?
I mean, I have 2 million people, so you basically have around 20%, a little under 20% of our entire list having volunteered on healthcare. That's great. One of the conversion rates we looked in the campaign was 4 million people gave money. That was a great percentage. Most of those volunteered, but not all. So, it's actually a lot of people who volunteered. And, we just had training sessions all around the country last week because we, in the campaign, we were very reliant on volunteers, but we also had 6,000 staff. We have very few staff right now.
Right.
This is almost all a volunteer enterprise. So we're trying to surface people who choose to be community organizers, to use the word Sarah Palin loves. And they take responsibility, right? In Roanoke, Virginia, in Durango, Colorado, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it's them. They might have a job, they might have 2 jobs, but they're also doing this. And they're recruiting the volunteers, running the efforts around healthcare. Next year it'll be around other issues.
Now, I wanted to push you, though, in blue states and blue districts, we've also seen repeated asks for people to call their member or engage on healthcare. And as you know, one of the arguments that surfaced around that is people questioning whether that's a good use of activist time if their member of Congress perhaps is 100% with Obama, or some might say going further than Obama, fighting more for the public option explicitly, or a Medicare buy-in, or some of the issues that get into the weeds but would suggest they're not only a vote, they're ready to go further. Does it make sense to have them as a national whip? Do you think that's something that will evolve over the first term because it's an experiment now? Or do you think that simply thanking and pushing those members, even if they're already on board, is effective?
Well, that comes directly from our supporters. They said they wanted to do it. So, first of all, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have somebody from New York City call into rural Kansas to vote people. It just doesn't, okay? So, what they're doing is, a lot of people won't even, take the call, won't even register the, What matters is people have said, listen, even though we want to talk to our member of Congress, if they have been supportive, we want to thank them for that. And I must tell you, the response has been terrific. There's been a lot of people doing it, and the members have shown appreciation. And it's one way to build a relationship, by the way.
On the volunteer side, do you have a feel?
And the member side.
Well, you have a feel on the Hill?
Yeah. So, but the other thing is a lot of these folks on the Hill didn't have a relationship with our grassroots supporters.
Mm-hmm.
So the smarter candidates and elected officials are beginning to build relationships with the people who organized, moved message, and raised money in our campaign.
And what portion of Democrats on the Hill would you put in that smarter category?
I don't know exactly how many have done it, but I think the ones that, you know, tend to be a little closer to the ground.
Because like Senator Feinstein, as you saw, spoke out and was critical of OFA, and basically some of her supporters seemed to dislike the fact that she was saying, well, I don't need this and I don't need these meetings.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think most people felt otherwise. So I think that, you know, my view is if you are in the business of politics, you have an opportunity to meet new people, passionate people who've showed an ability to deliver. I'd be curious not to try and strengthen that relationship, and I think most people are going to try and do that and have tried to do it.
So, I mean, just to put a final point on this, it sounds like you're positing the current OFA and the governance model as both energizing and mobilizing people in the support network who want to take action for the agenda, but also sort of co-locating or sharing some potential activism with these members. I mean, you're basically saying it's a good...
But that's not a dictate. So where it makes sense, because here's the thing, nothing's transferable. You know, everyone has to say, well, okay, so all these people that voted for Obama for the first time, how are you going to get them out in 10?
Mm-hmm.
Wrong question. How are you going to get them out?
Right.
Okay? Candidate, how are you going to get them out?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? We'll help. But I was his campaign manager. I could talk to 10 first-time voters, and they'd tell me, I'm definitely going to vote in that Senate race. But if they don't feel strongly about the candidate, haven't had a relationship with them, they're not going to vote. So this starts with the candidates. So we, of course, encourage it. Not all of our supporters want to get involved in elections. I think most probably do. But again, that will depend on the relationship. If they feel good about the candidate, both in terms of issues, but also because, hey, this is the kind of campaign I'd like to be a part of. See, we were a campaign, as you know, that cherished volunteerism, organizational work, put a huge value on it. I still think there's a lot of campaigns who view that as, well, hey, now that there's not as much envelopes to stuff anymore, what do we use our volunteers for? It's not just about money. See, so I think, you know, if you create a good environment where people feel valued and they think that, hey, this candidate for Congress or Senate or governor, really a good leader, believe in their positions, and I think I can play a meaningful role in the campaign, then you're going to have success. So, you know, and I think a lot of politics, still in our party, there's too much time focused exclusively on the center of the electorate, the undecideds. Now, that's critical. Of course it is. But that's always been the case. I think you have to spend as much time on the other side, which is, okay, how can we create the best electorate possible for ourselves? And I spent a lot of time in the book writing about that. This is something I don't think people had a full appreciation for in primary in general. That's what we were doing. How do we create the best electorate for ourselves? And for us, that was a lot of younger voters, a lot of minority voters, a lot of people who'd been checked out of politics, in some cases for decades. So I think you've got to do both things well. You just can't assume the turnout's going to come. It never does. You got to work at it as hard as you do the swing, undecided, middle of the electorate. And we, you know, focus maniacally on both. And I think smart campaigns need to do that.
Well, in the limited time we have, let's turn to another favorite topic of yours, which is, as you put it, the mainstream media. Because it really runs through the book how there were really at least two campaigns going on. And the one that at least the conventional, national, and broadcast media and cable news media was covering was wholly different than the actual campaign on the ground. And many people didn't catch up with that really till the end. We know conventional press reporting on key campaign news stories was repeatedly wrong. Clinton was not inevitable. McCain was not dead in the water in the early GOP primary. Some people remember a New York Times story that was discussing who he would endorse in the primary because he was so surely out. Giuliani and Thompson were not very viable, despite a lot of coverage that suggested that, while Huckabee and Paul were. And you discussed this and how you and Axelrod and Gibbs would call reporters jackals and get frustrated with some of these themes, which I think resonates particularly with a lot of Obama supporters who might read the book. What you didn't do is, you didn't give us a perspective on why you think our modern press is, as many people feel, so broken, or at least gets so many things wrong. People talk about corporate pressure, people talk about ratings, sensationalism. Obviously the internet can cut both ways. So you didn't really spell that out, even though you had such a insider, well-placed perspective on it. Why do you think just to stick to '08, that the media got so much wrong? What is underlying that?
Well, first of all, the media, we spend an enormous amount of time with the media. I cannot believe more strongly in the role the media has to play in our society. I mean, I'm worried about some of the economic situation out there because I think one of the unique things the mainstream media does is investigative journalism, particularly in local areas, local state legislators, city halls. If that goes away in some places, you could have corruption on the rise, for instance. And I think if you look at the coverage in the campaign of, some of the substantive things, debates between healthcare plans and tax cuts plans and positions on Afghanistan and Iraq, that's one, nothing could be more important, I think, to the body electorate out there, that's informative. It tended to be the focus on the, McCain puts out a snarky ad and that's what everybody on cable and online wants to focus on. And honestly, we tended to know if something was working or not, both from the research we did, but also because we were having so many conversations at the ground level.
But why do you think that was?
But what we thought was important, I think that, obviously, I'm not sure because I'm not in the news industry. I'm not studying the economics of it obsessively. You do see that media is, particularly cable TV, but also online, you've got people appealing generally to partisans. And partisans tend to be very political. The truth is, the swing voter in Toledo, Ohio, they didn't go on any of the political websites. They didn't watch CNN, MSNBC, or Fox. They didn't. It's one of, I think, the distortive elements of what's happening in Washington, is everybody thinks that's reality, but it's not in the country. So everyone's watching very political analysis and coverage that's focused on, why something was done. I mean, that's one of my problems with coverage. It's always like, what's the political motivation behind this? Sometimes you're just made a substantive decision and you're doing things. So I think what we had to do was fight through that. And one of the reasons I wrote this was, this may not be the case, but I wanted to write something that could stand the test of time. And one of the things that I think was unique about our effort was that we did chart our own course, that we did not measure ourselves based on what the political establishment or pundit class thought every day. Just did it. Now, part of that, because we had very clear metrics in our campaign. We knew in Roanoke, Virginia, and Raleigh, North Carolina, and Fort Myers, Florida, exactly what was happening that day. Were we making the progress we needed to win states? And did our local news coverage, that's still very important.
Right.
Was that what we needed it to be, both in terms of amount and quality? The evaluation of who won the day, who had the clever ad, who put who on the defensive.
Or who won the morning.
Or who won the morning.
Which is worse.
I'm not suggesting that everything's important. It's never fun to have 4 or 5 days when your opponent is lifted up and saying, listen, they're kicking your tail from here to San Francisco. But, that was less important to us. I mean, I think part of it is we had a stability and a grounding because we had a very, very clearly established theory on how we were going to win this election and the metrics that supported that, and that's what we followed.
Right. But on the political scoring, especially since you've been in politics for some time, it would be then not only that cable is watched by very few people, in which case it wouldn't matter as much, but rather that it spreads. And the White House has made that point in some of its disputes with Fox News, for example, around more opinionated programming and truth in labeling, really. And you describe in the book at one point when Hillary Clinton teared up in New Hampshire, an iconic moment, that some reporters emailed you and said, oh, I think she just cost herself the campaign, implying that they're sort of gaming it out with you or keeping score like that. I mean, that aspect of it, plus the cable that you just discussed, do you think that has gotten worse over the last 15 years and it spreads more, or you just think, this is just par for the course?
Well, my sense is it's gotten a little more political, that the coverage has become more of a political scorecard than it was maybe 15 years ago. I always think that's been a component of it. Obviously, it spreads more because people see a video of a news report and they'll whip it around to their email list, and millions of people do that, and next thing you know, there used to be the old adage, by the way, if something wasn't on the front page of the paper or led the TV news, then you didn't have to worry about it. But that may be the case, but it could be in 50 million people's inboxes by the end of the day. We had this guerrilla warfare going on in the campaign. All these emails about Obama that, we had to respond to because, it was real. It was reaching voters. So
you say the lies, some of the smears about Obama.
Yeah.
Well, that brings me to a point, and we can wrap it up because we're getting to our time here, but another interesting thing in what's not in the book was, with the exception of the Jeremiah Wright race speech, which comes through chronologically, and a few moments where you shared sort of your personal excitement about the campaign, about the candidate, race is largely not discussed and often sort of transcended throughout the narrative of the book, which is like the narrative of the campaign, which frankly is like the narrative of the first year. It seems that everyone else is excited and wants to discuss this, but of course, from the president on down, there's a certain tone most of the time about this. And yet, one of the frustrations I think some people have, although I don't know that it's at all the White House's fault or that there's a better way to do it, but a frustration in this first year is that some of the racially charged and racist attacks are not confronted and are sort of pushed to the side. To give one example, you have Glenn Beck, who has a very big megaphone saying that the president hates white people. And many people felt that was just a frankly racist and inappropriate thing. And yet, if there's one thing that Fox News and the White House apparently agree on, it's that that was not a racially charged or racist comment, and they said so. And the folks who at least are inside government for Obama say that repeatedly. And that might make political sense for them. You talked about politics. That might be politically wise as they need to focus on policy. But is it true, and is it ethically right for us to sidestep so many things that might better be confronted in this ongoing debate and in this historic presidency?
Well, I think you just have to look at where the bulk of the American people was. The truth is in the campaign. He was Barack Obama, an African-American candidate, and, that was just a reality. And so we spent very little time on this, on the issue of race. Our sense was people would accept him or not based on his ideas, his values, his leadership qualities, how he performed in the campaign. That race would be a very, very minor part of that. And part of that was our experience in Illinois, where we saw his ability. And I just think generally, this is a narrative. I mean, the truth is the Bradley effect didn't exist in the Bradley race,
right,
okay?
Right.
It just didn't, if you talk to people in the Bradley or Deukmejian campaigns. So, and we see Latino candidates, African-American candidates being elected in states with very little population. So we just generally believe that this was a kind of a chestnut from the past. And that's, but, and he had a lot of faith in people.
But
so
the
I
quote
think,
I gave you is not from the
yeah,
past.
but of course you're going to have some people. But I think, again, if you focus on just a few knuckleheads out there and elevate that, I think you have to have a good sense of where the American people is. And I believe that, the people who disagree with him on health care, who disagree with him in Afghanistan, are doing almost entirely based on the substance of that, having nothing to do with his skin color. And so obviously there's some people, Glenn Beck is going to continue to make offensive comments. That seems to be his shtick. And I think we all ought to realize that he's appealing to a fairly narrow audience that doesn't reflect the mainstream views of American people. So, but I think that, and I think, listen, I think that faith was rewarded in the campaign, which was that people are going to make this very important decision, both primary and general, based on a sense of, okay, what are you going to do to help my family? What are you going to do on health care? Do I think you have the leadership qualities? Do I think you have the steadiness to lead us through crisis? And those are really what they made the decision on. And I think as they evaluate it today, that's where they're making it on. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, in this town there's a lot of discussion of, well, Obama's poll ratings, let me tell you something, okay? In research I trust, he's still about where his vote total was, okay?
Right.
Which is remarkable given the economy.
Yeah.
Remarkable. And it speaks to the faith that people have in him, that he is making the right decisions here. The fruition of them all won't be clear. That's what's hard, by the way. The things he's trying to do, the full benefit of them won't be necessarily realized in the next election or the one after that or one after that. And back to your point about news coverage, almost all the coverage is about that. Well, what does this mean for 10? What does it mean for 12?
Right.
And the truth is, this is not like the normal political football issues. I think this is for all the marbles. I actually do believe we're at a crossroads in this country. And if we don't, strong countries have to renew themselves. We're at that moment on healthcare, on energy, on education. We've got to do tough long-term things. And if we don't do that, we're a strong country, but we'll continue to atrophy bit by bit. And we want to make this a stronger country in the next 50, 100 years as it's been in the past. And so we've got to do these tough things. Mm-hmm. And that's what's unique about him. That's what he's focused on. He's not focused on what this means in 2010 or what this means for the Electoral College outcome in Colorado in 2012. Mm-hmm. He's just not focused on that.
Well, and so this will take us to the last question. You talked about vote totals, you talked about data. One of the things I think that comes through in the book is your use of a very different metric system. And you talk about contrasting the polling, which is all over the place and notoriously unreliable early in primaries, especially with a first-time national candidate, with the other intelligence that you had, and that your organizing, particularly in smaller caucus states, became really a source of field intelligence. You write that field data comes from a huge number of conversations between our staff and volunteers and actual voters. It hits more broadly than polling, which only takes a small representative sample and extrapolates a bigger picture. Give us a sense for our readers and other viewers who are interested in, after you've hammered away at some of the things people shouldn't pay attention of, what is your diet of information? How do you keep an eye on, you talked about field conversations, how else do you keep an eye on what's going on out there? And what are the surveys, if any, that you do find more reputable in this period? What would people read if they wanted to know how they could see the world like David does?
Well, some of this is internal. A lot of this is internal information that's not available to the public.
Well, transparency, maybe you want to upload
Well,
some
yeah,
of it.
maybe.
But walk
no.
us through your diet.
So no, I think, and you know, there is kind of a secret sauce here, which I won't share in entirety because we'll probably need that down the road. But basically, you know, polling has its place, you know, and it certainly can pick up on trends, and it's part of a mix. But see, we always evaluated whether it was field data, voter ID work, polling, you know, because we were trying to adjust the electorate and had vote goals, you know, very precisely amongst different elements of the electorate, you know, men over 65 without a college degree, you know, African-American men between 18 and 45 with no vote history, on and on and on. It was what was happening beneath that was more important to us, because to win some of these states, North Carolina, Virginia, Florida, even Ohio, that we thought were going to be pretty close, some of them ended up being close, you know, we had to have the right complexion. So that's what we looked at, you know. So you, of course, have polling. We never really paid attention to any public polling, just didn't. We had our own research. Then we had all these thousands and tens of thousands of conversations happening in every state every day. And you put that all in a blender and you have pretty good radar about things are. But you know, it's not just where you stand with the election. You get great information back about what issues. You get a lot of information back that says, wow, you know, today at the doors, everybody was talking about X issue. You know, and that will be captured before the polling.
But nowadays,
so we would try and listen to that.
And nowadays, do you look at a Gallup or Pew, or are you really only looking at your secret sauce?
I don't look at Gallup or Pew.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not in an election. I mean, you know, of course I'm going to pay attention to polling, you know, as we head into next fall in terms of where people are on the, you know, for a sense of 2010. The individual research and races are going to be more important. But, you know, this notion that, you know, that you know, we should be looking at, you know, presidential approval numbers right now and obsessing about them. You know, we ought to be obsessing about healthcare, in my view, and energy and education, and that's what he's obsessed about. So, but I think good campaigns, you know, have great radar. So you understand exactly where you stand. Are you reaching your vote goals or not? And if not, you have to adjust. I mean, it's a very basic thing. But some campaigns don't live that every day. You know, you have to have a theory of how am I getting to 50% of the vote? And a lot goes into that. And you got to measure that really, really carefully. And if you're not on track, then you have to make some tactical adjustments, whether that's candidate time, resources, volunteer effort. And you know, that's what we looked at in the campaign. Obviously, you knew it every day. Hey, surging in the Terre Haute market, you know, lagging a little bit in the Indianapolis suburbs, make adjustments. You know, doing better in the Denver suburbs than we thought we were going to do, great. Go in there and build the margin. Not doing as well in Colorado Springs as we wanted to. You know, these are not real examples. These are, but that's what we did in the campaign.
Right.
And good campaigns do that. I can't speak to the McCain campaign, you know, how much they did that or not. But good campaigns, Senate campaigns, governor's campaigns, congressional campaigns. Of course, you're going to do your traditional polling. But part of this speaks to we had such a strong grassroots organization and believed in it. There are some campaigns out there in both parties, many campaigns actually, that have very little volunteer activity at all. It's raising money, it's press conferences, and it's ads.
Right, paid media.
By the way, those three things are important. But I think increasingly, with technology becoming more and more part of everybody's life, I think human beings talking to human beings is always the best form of communication. If you're trying to improve the electorate for yourself, those people are hard to find. You know, they don't have great voting history. The best way to get them to vote is to have a human being they trust on their block in their condo talking to them. So good campaigns have all that at the core of what they're doing. And I think that, you know, aside from just the value of that, I think it gives you much better intelligence about what's going on out there.
Excellent. Well, the book is Audacity to Win, and David, thank you for spending time with us and our readers.
Thank you, Art.